which they parked behind the house, where they had full view of the area surrounding the feedlot. Both men armed themselves with 30-06s, deer rifles, and the family's biggest watchdog was kept nearby. Is this thrilling? This is thrilling. This is a story from 1977. I hope you're enjoying it. What happened next only deepened the mystery. The first nights passed without incident, and the only thing Dahl and Dubois had to fight was drowsiness and fatigue. The men took turns standing watch all night after their long day's work, and the women brought coffee to the camper. Occasionally, a sound from the marsh, the crack of a twig, or a noise in the rushes would momentarily silence the frogs and crickets. Whoever was on guard would be immediately alert, but then the summer night sounds gradually would resume, and the blackness and the boredom would return. But on the night of August 18th, neither man could sleep. They sat in the camper and quietly sipped coffee, not daring to light cigarettes for fear of giving their position away. Midnight came and passed and nothing happened. But some time later, Dahl noticed a reddish light in the sky, low on the northern horizon. The light seemed to be some miles away, moving slowly toward them. He nudged Dubois, and they both watched as the approaching light assumed a distinctly cylindrical shape, without wings or tail. It arced across the clear night sky, accelerating as it went, then suddenly shot off and disappeared among the stars. Later, when he was checking the security perimeter on foot, Art Dahl saw it again, a large glowing red disk of light in the sky, almost directly overhead. He raced back to the van to alert Dubois, but by the time he reached there, the disk had vanished. The first light of dawn found the two men groggy with fatigue and totally befuddled by what they had seen. The next night was even more bizarre. Dahl and Dubois resumed their vigil at dusk. Both men had stolen several hours sleep. Both men had stolen several hours sleep earlier in the day and were fully alert, rifles loaded and ready. The two agreed they would both open fire on any intruder that did not heed their command to halt. Shortly before midnight, they heard an automobile on the dirt road in front of the farm. Somewhere down the road, the noise stopped. Then a car door slammed. Were the marauders human? The minutes ticked by as the men peered into the night, waiting tensely, hands on rifles and on the floodlight switch. An hour passed. All was quiet. Then, from near the house, behind the men, and directly away from the marsh, came a piercing shriek. Ah! Something like that. Ah! Piercing shriek. Dahl later described it as a screech growl, and said it was half human, half animal. The strangest thing he had ever heard. The women who had been sitting on the back porch of the darkened farmhouse fled indoors to be near the children. Minutes later, they heard another scream, exactly like the first one. Minutes later, they heard another scream, exactly like the first one. Only this time it came from the direction of the swamp, then another from the ravine to the south of the homestead, and yet another from back near the house. Dahl and Dubois crouched forward with their rifles in hand. Were the weird sounds signals? If they were, whatever it was seemed to have them surrounded. The frogs and crickets were quiet. Oh yeah. What are you gonna do now? They waited, perspiring in the humid closeness of the van. Their nerves taut. Although they could see nothing moving, they sensed something was approaching the feedlot. "Get ready, Henry," Dahl whispered. "They're coming at us." I don't really think that's a Minnesota accent. Probably more like, "Hey, get ready, Henry. They're coming at us. What do you think about that?" I love Minnesota. I used to go to Minnesota quite a bit in the 90s. And Minnesota girls are the best, babe. Alright, alright. Over the rise toward the big swamp, a large shadow seemed to materialize. The shape was not distinct in the faint light from the stars and fading moon. It was only a dark blob. Excuse me. It was only a dark blob, but much bigger than an upright man, and it was moving toward them. I would have been moving away from them. Suddenly, the big watchdog cowering under the camper, bolted for the house, loudly banging the metal floor of the slow-hung vehicle as he fled. The shadowy mass stopped for a moment and almost as quickly withdrew back toward the marsh. As it moved over the rise and receded into the trackless bog, it emitted another blood-curdling screech. The scream echoed in the stillness after the shadow had vanished. Dubois switched on the floodlights, and he and Dahl quickly searched the immediate area. They found nothing. Emotionally and physically drained, the two men lit cigarettes and forced themselves to resume their watch. The night passed without further incident. Woo! That's some scary shit. I can't wait to find out what happens next. But I do want to interject this. This is my own thoughts here. I don't feel this is a UFO. Sure, we're dealing with strange lights. That doesn't necessarily mean UFO in the sense of visitors from another planet. Now remember, the term UFO simply means unidentified flying object. A type of a bird could be a UFO. Now, mainly true, when we think of UFOs, we think of strange visitors from another planet. But all the word UFO says, unidentified flying object. That could be military test planes that we've never seen before. But in this instance, I feel it's something very different. By all the clues that we've amassed so far. We've got mutilated animals. The heads are being ripped off and removed. The body's mutilated. No blood, no tracks. This is something very different, but maybe something yet familiar. Something that we've glamorized. Use your head. I'm just reporting the facts as I read them from the story. You leave comments and thoughts on what this story is down in the comment section. Subscribe to this channel. Now, without further ado, let's get back to this gripping tale. Ooh, ooh, ooh. It made an unearthly screech. Scared me. I learned of the case a few days later from Art Dahl, who had heard of my investigation of nocturnal lights in the region. After I surveyed the terrain, I went to the Chissago County Sheriff's Office, where they told me about their investigation of the mutilation of Dubois' pig in July. There wasn't much evidence to go on, and little Sheriff Floyd Pinotti or his officers could do to prevent another attack. Then I spoke with Game Warden Peterson, who also had looked into the matter of the slaughtered pig. There wasn't really anything to go on, he said, but the day I was out there, those pigs were sure spooked. Something had been after them. We couldn't get near them. What about predatory animals? A bear, maybe, I asked. We could have a bear in there, I guess, he replied, although we've found none of the usual signs, tracks, or feces, and a bear usually won't kill that way, except maybe when just out of hibernation. July was the wrong time. A bear will tear its prey apart, but it would take a hell of a lot of force to pull the head off of a pig. Something stronger than a bear to pull the head off of a pig. That part of the mystery puzzled me particularly. I asked several veterinarians to estimate the brute strength required to rip the head from a 100-pound hog and crush every bone in his body. The estimates all ran to well over 1,000 pounds of pressure. Before I left the busy sheriff's office in Chicago City, I asked a few more questions. What kind of people were the Dubois and Dahls? What about their relationships in the community? Would anyone have reason to try to intimidate them or play jokes on them? I was told that the families kept to themselves and maybe were even a bit eccentric in their reclusiveness, but they were quiet, law-abiding citizens with no known enemies. The officers said there had been no other cases of animal mutilations in the area, but a number of people, including one of the deputies, had seen unusual lights in the sky over Carlos Avery Game Preserve. I asked Art Dahl to contact me if anything more happened in the coming months, but the winter passed without word from the beleaguered families. Then in April 1977, I heard from Art Dahl again. Soon afterwards, I interviewed the two families at Dubois' farm. They told me that things seemed to return to normal after the incredible events of August 19, 1976. Although the men continued the stakeout, September and October passed quietly. With the onset of cold weather and the beginning of hunting season, the men gave up the watch. In November, when the deer hunting season began, Dahl and Dubois crossed the marsh behind the Dubois farm and set up their lookout stands, from where they hoped to make a kill. Because of the upsetting events of the summer, both men were on the lookout for anything unusual, but everything seemed quite ordinary, with one exception. There were no deer. Yet, there had always been deer, plenty of them. They never had experienced any problem making their seasonal kill. Now, however, the woods seemed deserted. The men went out again and again, sometimes alone, sometimes with relatives, with no luck. Then, as the season was nearing its close, Dubois' brother, Frank, burst excitedly into the kitchen of the old house. He had come through the cold, gray dusk from the big marsh where he had been hunting. His face was ashen, and he had lost one of his gloves. His clothes were muddy and torn from struggling through the underbrush. He never would go near the marsh again. He announced to the Dubois family something strange was out there. It had followed him, moving as he moved, stopping as he stopped, mimicking his every action, but always remaining just out of sight in the thick vegetation. He couldn't see what it was, but he could sense its presence. It was always just behind him, or just abreast of his track through the forest, snapping branches and breaking small saplings, moving noisily with him through the tangled brush. It seemed to know in advance where he would go. Gradually, he had become frightened and then terrified. Several times, on the verge of panic, he had fired into a thicket, hoping to drive away the phantom stalker. But as soon as he began to move again, it was with him. He did not escape it until he emerged from the swamp just back of the farm near the feedlots. Dahl heard of the episode and a few days later went into the woods alone to investigate. The rugged schoolteacher who prided himself on his expertise as a hunter and woodsman returned thoroughly shaken. There sure as hell was something out there, he decided. Something that could follow. Something that could follow you through the woods, sensing your every move, just out of sight. The something had to be very large and very strong, because Dahl had circled back and found 3 and 4 inch saplings snapped off high on the trunk where it had moved through the woods. He even tried to ambush the thing by dropping silently into a dry creek bed and crawling on his belly for several hundred feet to double back on his own trail. But no matter what he did, it remained hidden and seemed to know what Dahl was doing. Finally, driven by anger and frustration, he rushed the spot where he believed his invisible quarry to be. He was stumbling through the woods with his deer rifle trained on the wall of brush in front of him, when suddenly a hideous scream froze him in his tracks. It was right there in front of him, the half-human, half-animal screech growl. It echoed through the forest and was followed almost immediately by the noise of something crashing heavily through the underbrush, away from where he stood. The gray November light was fading rapidly in the forest. He didn't want to be out there in the darkness. Art Dahl had had enough. The hunting season ended, and the bitter cold and heavy snow of the Minnesota winter set in. The men took snowmobiles into the marsh and over the terrain where they had hunted. They could find nothing unusual. The winter passed and spring came, and with it a horrifying new incident. In early 1977, the Dubois Shetland mare gave birth to a colt. The birth was normal. The colt appeared healthy, and the mother and offspring were turned out to graze on the tender spring grasses in a small pasture behind